Well, today I'm talking to Liz Dunn. This is going to be really interesting because Liz grew up in Auckland in a large Catholic medical family. Her grandfather was a prominent obstetrician who delivered many Catholic babies in Auckland, and her father is a well-known surgeon still practicing in Auckland. She completed a Bachelor of Science and then a medical degree at the University of Auckland, has been a doctor for 10 years. She's now a senior trainee in anaesthesia and will complete her specialist qualification in a year's time. Before we started, we just had a chat about how long it takes to actually qualify in that field. She believes that practicing medicine is a real privilege and is passionate about improving people's experience overall, especially with patient-centred care and safety and crisis management. She also has a special interest in the welfare of doctors, particularly anaesthetists. So, Liz, tell us how you decided to become a doctor, though there's a bit of a hint there already in your family history, and the voyage to get there, the journey, to use the jargon, to get to where you are now.
I think you're right. I definitely grew up in this big family. My father probably had a lot of influence in where I ended up. But it was a bit of a roundabout way. After school, I was quite young when I left school, about 17. I guess I had a pretty sheltered conservative upbringing and went to a private girls' school. And I was 17 when I came out of school, so I went and did a science degree. I did sports science and psychology at the University of Auckland. And during those 3 years, I think I really grew up, found myself. I came out, and that was really formative for me. And it's really during those years I got good enough marks, and I thought, I want to give medicine a crack, actually, because I've always been into science and health and into people. And so I got into medicine, and that was really fantastic for me, and I was glad that I'd taken those extra years. It's quite funny, actually, being, I guess, at med school. On the surface, I looked like one of the rich white kids, but I was actually identified with a few of the minority groups because I was a mature student, being a little bit older. I had my Pacific Island heritage, Cook Island roots, which helped me get into med school, actually, and being gay as well. So that came with me in the background. And I graduated in 2007. And so that does mean, 10 years this year I've been a doctor.
Amazing.
I took my time deciding what I wanted to be. Initially, having that influence from Dad, I thought I wanted to be a surgeon, but you really have to want to be standing up and cutting and tying off blood vessels at 1 a.m. It's quite a physically demanding job, and also it is difficult for women to do surgery. It is physically, mentally demanding, and there's definitely that sort of old boys club, and whether there's that possibility to take time off and have children or go part-time, it just seems impossible, or especially when I was coming through. Anyway, I did a lot of medicine, and then happened upon anaesthesia, which is, I think, a really good balance for me. It's really taking the medical side of things, working in the theatre environment, and it's a very practical specialty. And then that's my passion, really, is improving people's experiences, everyone I come across. So the patient experience of safety, and it's really a privilege to be there, because it's one of the most, people coming for surgery is a huge life experience, especially if you get involved in people's, I'm really into obstetric anaesthesia, so doing labour epidurals is a real privilege, just trying to get women on side, and then often in the most extreme pain, and then being able to take that away by putting an epidural in for them and helping that experience. And the same for surgery, or if people find they've been in a big car crash and they come racing in, is really to establish that rapport, and and then get them through that in the most safe and comfortable way possible. So it really suits me.
I mean, I can certainly speak from experience about the hugely important role of the anaesthetist in making the whole experience far more or far less unpleasant, shall we say, than what it could be. So what was it like going through university and then trying to batter? Well, I say batter because I've heard it from you and from my son-in-law, Andy, of course, who you know, and from Peter, my son, just what a hard job it is trying to get anywhere in your field.
Yeah, I think I found med school okay.
Yeah.
It's certainly a lot to get through. You do all the different body systems and everything, pharmacology, genetics, physiology, anatomy. But it's a really interesting job. And I think after, I don't know, 5 years of studying and exams, I almost was ready to throw in the towel. But when we got into the clinical years of being in the hospital and really applying what you know, but actually a lot of it's just common sense and communication and putting it together, and that's what really got me interested, and that's what I love is really interacting with people. And a lot of the time you see things that you've never seen before, and you have to sort of put on a straight face and go, yeah, we'll get you through this. But you're like, whoa, what is going on? and that's when you draw on your experience and your knowledge, and putting people at ease, I guess.
You do hear some stories.
Yeah.
What are some of the difficulties you've come up against? Any?
I think. Oh, look, if we're talking about sexism, it's actually, I think medicine's come a long way, and it's come from the years of being a very male-dominated profession, obviously, and it's a very hierarchical profession.
Yeah.
But a lot of those barriers have been broken down now, and especially in my specialty and others, I think every female doctor will tell you stories of, for instance, in the hospital, you'll go and see a patient and you'll say, hi, I'm Liz Dunn, I'm your anaesthetic doctor for today, or whether you're a house officer on the wards. And then you'll go through their whole medical history and examine them and come up with a plan. And then the patient will turn around and say, nurse, could you pass me my water? and I mean, you know, not to be disparaging of nurses, but you do want them to know that they've actually seen a doctor for the day, and that's very common. And so I think that certainly happens from patients sometimes. It's probably the older patients, and it happens less and less these days. So you certainly get that. I'm not sure if I've had anything personally where I've felt that I've been disadvantaged for being a woman, but there's certainly many stories. I mean, the other day, one of my consultants, who's quite a young, I respect her so much, and she said that she had a plastic surgery list. Probably shouldn't say which specialty, but anyway, they called her up and they said, look, we want to start early. We want to have knife to skin at 7:30, and would you be able to get in? And you know, we want to get cracking. We've got a big day of it. And she replied saying, oh look, I start work at 7:30, so I'll be in there. I'll see the patient, and we'll get him in for 8 o'clock, and we'll have knife to skin at 8:10. And our usual aim is knife to skin at 8:30. And she got a call from the service manager who said, look, you know, like, is this a childcare issue? Because I can understand if this is a childcare issue. And she just said, look, this is not a childcare issue. This is me starting work at 7:30 from when I get paid. And so things do happen like that often. So but I think we're lucky in anaesthesia in that we've got a very equal male and female spread, I guess. And there's other specialties where women might choose to work in, such as pediatrics, general practice, obstetrics. There's certainly ones that there's more scope to go part-time. There's more women in those roles, so there's more of an understanding.
Yeah.
And the converse, the typical one that people talk about is surgery, where it's still quite male-dominated, especially in some of the surgical specialties. And those would be cardiac surgery, orthopedic surgery,
All right.
Neurosurgery, and then some of the other, for instance, interventional cardiology. It'd be very much male dominated, and it's quite hard to crack into that old boys club, really.
Yeah. And
you hear stories of, they have their, end of year function, they'll be sitting around smoking cigars with strippers, like.
God. I was just amazing.
And so, yeah, you can understand, and some of them are less understanding if, for whatever reason, if you do need to, have time out because of your kids, or you're not there to, you want to extend your training time, for instance, it can be hard, or you just don't want to be around that sort of vibe.
No. Well, I see. No.
Yeah.
Do you think that's gradually changing as those older ones move out? Is the culture changing, or is it continuing because it's passed on?
I think it's gradually changing, and I really hope so. There's been, in Australia, so in New Zealand, we share colleges, so training colleges for each specialty with Australia. And the Royal Australasian College of Surgeons, in the last couple of years, it's been very topical, and there's a lot of media releases, and I was just reading the Australian Women's Weekly, but there was accusations of sexual harassment coming from the older male surgeons with the younger female trainees. And essentially what happened was, one woman complained again for being harassed, well, in a very bad way, from her senior. And it really, it ended up, even though I think she won the case or whatever, he continued practicing and was even a head of department. And she was really unable to complete her training and get a consultant post in surgery because of bringing those complaints about him. And so, another prominent female Australian surgeon came out saying, well, maybe you should just give them a blowjob if you want to get through your training. So that exploded in Australia, and the College of Surgeons has since released a whole lot of guidelines and protocols and statements, and it's been on sort of bullying and harassment, and that's filtered down to other specialties. Anaesthesia is aware of that as well. And so I think there's a bit of a groundswell of change at the moment, but it really is up to women to just keep on at it. But you are stuck between a rock and a hard place, and that's, in your training, you are under, you're under these people who are going to decide on your future career.
Yeah.
And that's whether you're male or female, you've got to toe the line in a lot of ways. So if you're seen as disruptive or whatever, then
read that one, disruptive. God, because you really want to change things. Yeah.
Getting through your training and getting a job at the end of it, which is essentially what we all want. Yeah.
It's amazing that the medical profession has taken so long to start recognising these problems, and you need a major media explosion before anything really happens. But I suppose this plus side of that is it is happening. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it is changing, and it's a good time. Like, it's exciting, and I really hope that it all filters through. Certainly in general surgery, there's more and more female surgeons. Some really good women surgeons. Actually, a very recent, it makes me think, I think it's a British journal published a study where they've looked at hundreds of thousands. I think it might have been Canadian, very, very recently, and that sort of hit social media in the medical realm. They compared male and female surgical outcomes, and the mortality rate in the hospital for female surgeons was actually lower, significantly lower, not in just in one aspect. And so all the women are dining out on that, of course, but have come out and said,
are we surprised? Well, of course not.
And I guess people are commenting on why that might be, but women tend to follow protocols, not go off piste, and are in a lot of ways good communicators and more collaborative with patients and with the other multidisciplinary team members. So perhaps that's got some bearing on it. But I think it's quite interesting that medicine as a industry is only just now really looking at gender differences and outcomes, and I think we'll see more and more research in this in the future.
It's not happening more widely, like this huge. It's funny, ever since Donald Trump became president of the States, there's been this. It's like the whole thing about women's rights and equality, gender equality and so on was just bubbling under the surface. Nothing happened. And then you get a ghastly man like that come in as president and it all explodes. And it's amazing how much more active women are becoming, and even men are starting to think about it. And then, of course, this latest thing about Hollywood. Have you any thoughts on all that, the more general aspects of what it's like to be a woman in today's world?
Yeah, it's tough. It's like you say, I think that, with Donald Trump, and it's solidifying a lot of women into taking action and saying, hey, this is not okay. What's going on with the world? When I watched your video, I think with Fiona Crichton, and she talked about growing up in the 70s and sort of thinking, I guess, was it the first wave of feminism? Or
just about finished, yeah.
Yeah, I should brush up on my history of feminism, but she felt at the time that you just needed to wait for all these old men to die off and then things would be great again. And I was a teenager in the 90s, and there was, I think, the music, the pop culture, a lot of women had short hair. You had people like Alanis Morissette screaming at, on the radio, and people were wearing baggy jeans and things. And I felt that we were onto a really good thing. I thought that everything was changing. Women were, gaining equality. And I'm really worried about the way the world has gone since then. You see young women, I'm 36, so but women in their teenagers in their 20s, they'll be going out on the town wearing tiny little dresses and high heels and lots of makeup, and that's kind of expected. And then just the way that all young people have exposure to porn and how hardcore that is, and I guess that's a lot of people's sexual education these days. I'm going all over the show, but I am really worried about what's happening with young people and who's responsible and who's going to change this, because even my generation, I'm kind of at the tail end of Generation X. I feel like I don't have the know-how, technologically through the internet. If I was to have children, how to keep on top of that, how to keep them safe, how to educate them. So I am really worried about the state of the world. I hope that the generation coming through, Generation Z, I guess, are going to take responsibility for it themselves, because they have the know-how.
Yeah.
Together with being educated from older women saying, look, this is the way it was, and this is the way it could be, and you need to use your influence in the world, the way you can communicate with everybody and put it out there to improve how things are.
Instead of sitting back, because we were I was, born in the early 50s, and so was a teenager through the 60s, university late 60s, early 70s, right when the first big movement, I mean, apart from the suffragettes, of course, of feminism was coming through. And it's interesting what you said about the way you dress, because we actually dress very similarly. Not quite as much exposure, but my goodness, our skirts were short. When you look back, we got very good, very strong thighs, sitting down nicely so you didn't show your knickers. But there was never you didn't hear too much about, well, you're asking for it if you dress like that. That seemed to develop a bit later. But there again, the attitudes back then were pretty appalling. It's a bit of an education if you go and look at some of the old Bond films that we not even blink at. They were appalling, So things have actually come a long way. But I think there's a real worry that we're taking several steps backwards at the moment. And a lot of it is online, like the abuse that someone like Lizzie Marvelly gets online from these stupid men here in New Zealand who she says something they don't like, instead of saying, I disagree with you and this is why, they call her all sorts of names, and she's even been threatened, and it's that sort of thing that worries me.
It makes me so angry, that sort of thing. I think it's really interesting that it's almost polarized, and you've got all of these people who've, I guess the middle class, lower middle class, maybe, I don't know, white men who feel disenfranchised and disempowered, and them pushing back. And then the internet allows you to troll whoever anytime.
Sometimes, if you ask them, well, what is it that you're disempowered about? It's just that they've been told they're disempowered, but they're not. It's an interesting thing. Do you, also you talked about coming out. Did you find that made life any more difficult, being not only a woman but gay as well?
I think so. I mean, coming out, I touched on it earlier, in that my family were quite conservative from in my childhood and early teenage years. My grandfather, who was this obstetrician, he founded the Society for the Protection of the Unborn Child. And so I was coming from a family where, both my parents came from Catholic families, and I was always told, no sex before marriage, and, you're going to be da-da-da-da-da. So when I came out, I was very worried about what they would think. I was 19 at the time, and I knew that they would love me no matter what, but you also have that deep doubt, like, well, this is where they came from and their beliefs. And thank goodness at first, Dad sort of said, oh, well, it's a phase, as they do. But I was really lucky, and they actually took it on board and assessed it for what it was. And they've been very supportive, and I've actually got 2 gay siblings. So I hope that I helped pave the way for them, actually.
Yeah.
But through my life, I think I had a few friends that I might have lost because of it in the early days, but my generation are more accepting. I guess I live in a bubble, being in Auckland, in the sort of inner suburbs, with, a big group of gay and straight friends, and everyone's just pretty cool about it.
Yeah.
But you have to think about when you bring it up, like for instance, when you're outside of, when you're in a smaller town or another country, checking into a hotel, when they want to give you twin beds or something, and you're always having to come out, even if I go to a GP and he or she will ask me about things, you have to explain yourself every time. It's things like that I guess straight people might take for granted. And then you don't know necessarily if you do get discriminated against in the workplace or behind the scenes, because it's, I think I'm lucky in medicine. People are very, you've got to be open-minded. You come you're exposed to all sorts of people. So I'm a strong person myself. I'm like, this is me. So I'm lucky in that way.
I do think in most of the professions, it's less of a problem than it would have been. You know, people don't seem to worry about it so much. Certainly, Peter hasn't had any issues at all, you know, that I'm aware of. No, it's interesting because, you know, we've been talking mostly about sexism and the position of women. Well, of course, there's more to it than that.
I think, well, I mean, if we talk about the marriage equality at the moment is a huge topic in Australia, and there's been a lot of people seeking psychological help because of the sort of hate that's going on over there. And I mean, I think Australia is just so far behind most other Western countries, it's ridiculous. But certainly in New Zealand, the work of Rainbow Youth, there's still a lot of young people who are being disowned by their families or being disadvantaged. And especially if you don't look a certain way, or if you have sort of gender fluidity, or you're transitioning or struggling with your gender, I think that's the next big problem that we all need to be aware of. I think lesbians through time, one of my bugbears is we're kind of ignored in a way. Sometimes you hear in gay literature, oh, gay people, this, that, and the other, and you realise that actually they're just talking about gay men. And gay women aren't even factored in. Things are slowly changing though, you know, it's cool to have your gay characters on TV programs and things, and I think we're becoming a little bit more visible. And
those characters are not a joke anymore, like they would have been.
Yeah, there's still the jokes. Like it does get, you'll often see a Hollywood movie where whatever the female will end up with a woman, but just as a joke, you know, just.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, that's still quite common. What was I going to say? Yeah, I think the other thing with lesbians is that we do have that sort of double wage inequality as well, and you know, two women tend to be, you know, teachers or police or some, you know, other female dominated industries. And you know, I've got lots of gay male friends who, you know, two male incomes actually compared with my lesbian friends in partnerships, that you do see the difference.
Yeah, you do.
And that's a real phenomenon just for women all over, but that's something that I'm aware of as well.
And it doubles up, yeah.
Yeah, I think we just need to increase our visibility, really. Women need to get out there and,
Yeah. Well, Liz, that has been really interesting, and thank you so much for that. Anything you want to add before we finish?
No, I think I really admire the work that you're doing, and I'm really flattered that you asked to talk to me as well. And I think we just need to keep having these conversations with other women and thinking about the ways we can improve outcomes for women in general. Yeah.
Oh, well, thank you very much. And it was an absolute pleasure. I mean, you were an obvious person for me to ask.
Thank you. Thank you very much.